Two, one. Hello and welcome to Wine Sisters of the Vine. I'm Carrie from Oregon.
And I'm Regina from Atlanta. And we are Wine Sisters of the Vines. How are you doing, my sister?
I'm doing amazingly well today and so excited for our guests that we have on the show here in our little home state of Oregon to share with you.
Yes. I'm so excited. So who do we have on our chat today?
Well, we have my mother, Donna G. McDaniel, and then we have they're co-starring with us today, and then Jessica Mozeico's mother, Mona. Say hi, Mona.
Hi, Mona.
There you go. And then Jessica Mozeico, the winemaker and proprietress at AFI, is here as the star of our party, and she's going to share her life planting and producing Pinot Noir. Hey, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us, and Mona and Donna Jean. We're so excited about this intergenerational conversation.
Yes, this is fantastic.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. And I know I was really excited, Carrie, to hear about what you were doing with Wine Sisters. So thank you very much for inviting us.
My pleasure.
It is my pleasure. I'm very honored to meet you today. You and Mona. Mama.
That's okay. I'd be happy to be your mama.
That's right. You're adopted mama. You're West Coast mama.
Okay, that's great to know.
So, Jessica, let's get right to the food and wine conversation here. Tell us about your background and what do you love most about what you do?
Sure. I mean, I feel really lucky. So I'm the owner and winemaker of AFI Wines here in Oregon. AFI means and daughter in French, and it's named that because my father and I started the winery together 18 years ago. We started it because my dad, who was a software engineer, had a hobby of making wine in the garage when I was growing up, and of course I always had to help him. And he did that for 20 years. And over the course of those 20 years, my mom was very patient and he kept getting better and better at his hobby. And one day he said that he was thinking about doing it professionally. I was working in biotechnology in the Bay Area. And I said, yeah, Dad, you should really go do that. And he said, well, I would want to have a partner. So we started the winery together.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, so to be clear, I did not have a background in wine. My pathway into wine was entirely out of family loyalty and wanting to encourage him to do something that I didn't think he'd otherwise do. So my background was in science and business in biotechnology.
There's a stool where I can sit.
That is a beautiful story, Jessica, and we're so excited to hear more about that story as we go on too. So, Donna Jean?
Yes.
You and Mona, this is the question that I have for you in this conversation starting out. Would you like to answer it first? We have...
go ahead, Mona. I don't care. I'd like to hear her story too.
Okay. Mona?
Yes.
You spent 2 decades in the International Ikebana Association, well, 2+ decades, right, in doing Ikebana. And you were also involved in the early origins of establishing this winery. So you and Donna Jean have those 2 things in common. So what would you like to share about the creative aspect about both Ikebana and planting a vineyard?
Well, I don't recall there being anything romantic about planting a vineyard.
Amen.
You know, it's like sticking sticks in the mud at every so many feet. And we planted the first vineyard in Wilsonville. And that was in, I don't know, in 80 or somewhere around there. And then after we moved to Parrot Mountain, which is on the edge of the winemaking district, he planted another vineyard, and a small one. And we're up pretty high at 1,000 feet, so you know he didn't increase the acreage. of plantings because it is quite high. But we were, you know, he wanted to do everything himself. That's how he did things. So guess who was commandeered into helping at every step? Jess and myself. So
Yes.
that's not so creative, but when you live on land, the creative part is working with the vines. For Ikebana, I would bring in vines now and then to use in our arrangements. You use, in the school that Donna Jean and I were involved in, you could use anything you put your hands on and make it beautiful. So
Wow.
that's about what I can say about your question.
Wonderful contribution. Yeah, you can make beautiful anything you put your hands on in Ikebana and also in winemaking. So I like that. Donna Jean, would you like to add to that same question about creativity in Ikebana and planting that vineyard that you planted in 1972?
Well, Mona and I shared many dignitaries, experts who came from Japan to give us the fine points. And one dignitary looked at what I had brought and thought it was really quite elegant and said, where did you find it? And I said, Goodwill. And brought the house down. And he looked at me and he said, what is Goodwill? Which is typical. I've been in a ditch for cattails and, well, I dragged the kids to help at the Japanese garden. We've shared a lot. After all, she and I both have over 30 years of doing Japanese flower arranging.
That is fantastic.
So translate that to the part about the vineyard too, in terms of making that piece of land when you and Dad first got it and it was covered in walnut and plum trees. And tell us about what it was like to clear those trees and plant that vineyard and shoot your flare gun backwards.
No, shame on you.
And string the wire all over the house, trying to measure the wire for the guy wire.
That's incredible.
We were part of the first dozen pioneers. Whatever that means, I have no idea. It means that you really don't know a whole lot about what you're doing. And you are learning as you're going. And if you could do it wrong, you specialized in it. We had no idea how to lay out 15 acres of vineyards. So Jim brought home a steel wire that measured, what were the rows, 20 feet, Jim, 50 feet?
Wrong.
The wine rows, 50 feet, weren't they?
Is it apart?
No, length.
I don't know how to do it.
And we took that wire that he brought home and strung it all the way through the house. Now he said, you put a little piece of tape every 7 feet or 6 feet. It's going to be 6 by 6. So we started at one end and the whole family tripped over this as I went carefully down. Only I used 1-inch tape. And I didn't measure exactly always from the top or the bottom. So when I got there, I was only off by 15 feet. So they said, take it all off. So we took it all off and we started over. And that's only one thing we did brilliantly.
But you're still married 50 years later after that.
That is incredible.
In the beginning, the birds came from Canada on their flights over saying, yummy, this is a good lunch stop. We'll stop on the vines right here. And you'd have these beautiful flocks that would just slowly descend on your vines. So what do you do to get rid of them? Well, one brilliant wag said, we'll put up kites. So we went to Portland and we got Japanese wonderful kites and we had them on all the imposts. Oh, it was
And the birds went to
unbelievable. And the birds sort of
They didn't care.
settled down in the vineyards. So the next thing they wanted to get the birds out, they had a gun that it makes a big noise. It's just a sound gun, but it's got a lot of powder in it. And there's one end goes out and one end goes the other way. And so people would go out with the guns and go bang, bang, and the birds would come up and then they would settle back down again. We had a terrible, terrible loss. Not so much with deer, because deer don't like to go down narrow alleyways. No, the vines were 6 by 6, 6 feet between the rows. Now they're less than that, and 6.
So it's 9 feet.
Oh, Jim says I'm wrong. It was 9 feet. Well, what the heck? And anyway,
Regina,
Yes.
would you like to propose the next question to these two lovely ladies?
Yes, I would. And I have the 2018 Viognier that I have just opened. I could not wait. Like, I'm dying to taste this. So while I'm doing the taste, DJ, Mona, do you have any advice for women who have dreams and want to go forward with those dreams? Oftentimes, we have these dreams and then we don't execute and act on them. And since it doesn't matter what age you are, you always have dreams until you don't. Any advice for women out here going to be listening?
May I start?
yes,
Yes.
please.
Well, I remember when Jess was trying to convince her dad to go into the wine business professionally. She said, "What better time than right now, Dad? You're not going to get younger." And that's the great advice. My advice to any woman starting out on a venture, if you have a dream, you need to follow it, because only when you follow your dream and your passion will you ever get good at something. Only then. If you don't have the love, you will not have the passion, and you won't excel in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the clue. If you love something, go do it.
Nice.
You'll find
Go do it. Yes. We should put that on a t-shirt. Go do it. Go do it.
Great advice.
I love it. Yes. So, Miss Donna,
Yes, dear.
same question for you. Any advice for
Okay.
women wanting to live their dream?
One of the things I think you have to do, which I remember was pretty funny for both Jim and I, is that when you are on the creative edge, and believe me, starting vineyards in Oregon when there were none,
Mm-hmm.
and Jim's brother said, well, this isn't a wine drinking state. We drink a lot of beer. And there wasn't a lot of encouragement that way. And you have to weather the idea. You have to really, really want to try it and turn a deaf ear.
Yeah.
And I think that goes with all creativity. Mona and I knew that in the Japanese flower arranging. Some people would come in and say, oh, there's only 3 flowers in there. That isn't very interesting. There's every form of creativity. You have to turn a deaf ear, because you're working in an area most of the time in the beginning where nobody has gone.
That's right.
And I just, don't be discouraged. Don't let people talk you out of what could be a wonderful experience.
And as Mona said, start now.
It's, yeah.
Start
Start.
now.
Exactly.
And I'm not afraid to start now either. So how about you?
There you go.
That iPad doing a good job.
I love that. I love that. Great advice from both of you. And I just tasted this fantastic Viognier. Viognier is one of my personal favorites. And cheers to you, Jennifer. Great job.
Oh my gosh.
It's outstanding.
Thank you so much for trying it, Regina, because one of the things that I would like to do with this Viognier is to explore that there's really a different style that can be made in sort of a cool climate Viognier that can be higher in acid, have a leanness to it, and just sort of a crisp acidity and minerality to it. So I do it all in stainless steel. And I really think it's the cool climate that helps us with that.
Well, that's it. I mean, like right when it went in my mouth, it was just that searing acidity, which I absolutely love. And it's just fantastic.
And it just makes me want to pair, like, what would you pair with this, Jessica? This is such great food wine.
Yeah,
It is.
I think because of its high acidity, it can cut through a fair amount of, it can hold up to quite a bit of spice. So things like Thai, Indian, things that you don't necessarily think of as food friendly necessarily that it can hold up to.
Most
It also
important.
is beautiful with crab, oysters, and seafood as well.
What'd you have
Hey, you
for
know,
dinner,
I
Regina?
had crab legs for dinner, and I waited until the chat to do it. I could so go back and get those crab legs and eat them right now. Like this would
Exactly.
be fantastic with it.
Oh, I love it.
Well, I'm gonna have to have crab legs again tomorrow because I have
Good.
to have this
There
with
you
the
go.
crab legs.
Part
Yeah.
2.
Part 2.
When you come to the West Coast, you have to have West Coast crab legs too.
Yes, definitely West Coast crab legs. And how is that different from my other crab legs?
I don't know.
Tell me all about it.
There's some oysters to go with it out here and some
Yeah,
clams.
but see, we're not near water or anything, so everything we get is pretty much shipped in. So unless we're in Savannah, Georgia, which is a port for us in here in Georgia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Jessica, so I hear that Forbes wrote about you, about how you create wines and how those wines pair so well with food that, you know, it's a memorable experience. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it connects us to other cultures?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that that makes me think of is so everything I learned about wine was from my dad, and we made wine until he passed away in 2017. And now I make wines that are inspired by his legacy and my daughter's future. And if you
Mhm.
hear a banging, I apologize because it's probably my 5-year-old daughter wondering why both her mom and her grandmother are in a room by themselves. But
That
anyway,
happens here all the time.
No worries.
Animals.
We got animals. It's just it's like a little forest around here. So
so
it's fine.
so one of the reasons that we started the winery was really because it was something that we shared, that we enjoyed having wine at dinner and having conversation, and we wanted to bring that to other people. And you know, the purpose of what we do, the reason behind it, is really about family. You know, our story is about family. It's how we started. It's why I continue, and what I hope accompanies our wines after they leave us.
Open the door.
So it's really meant to be a connection point. And I think one of the things about wine that's important is that sharing wine is communal, and the bond that it forms is much stronger than the differences. So my dad and I used to talk about this in the sense that we were 2 different generations, 2 different genders, 2 different backgrounds and life experiences, and yet isn't it always wine that can bring us together in commonality?
Yes.
Common experience, partially because we know that wine is really this unique confluence of time and place, and that you're experiencing it with someone else in a totally different spot than it will be. You know, Regina, when you experience that Viognier tomorrow with the crab legs, you're going to have a different experience. You might have different conversation, you have different foods that accompany it, but it's about that unique time and place that go into it.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we always have this one question of, diversity as it relates. And what better way? I mean, wine comes from everywhere. You can travel to places without ever having stepped foot there through wine. So I think that's a great commentary on wine and how it connects cultures together. So thank you for that.
Regina, I agree with you. It can be really a great equalizer in a lot of ways. I mean, in some ways, obviously, it can, your experience of a wine is so inexorably tied to your experience. Like, no 2 palates are the same. So if I were saying that, if I were insisting that this reminds me of lychee, and, Donna Jean had never had a lychee, it would mean nothing to her.
Right.
But she has had lychee, but yeah.
Exactly. But so much of our experience.
I love that analogy. True.
Exactly what we've experienced. And then on top of that, we either have a positive or negative connotation based on whatever our association is. And that is so uniquely personal. But it's by sharing it that it can become an equalizer, I think.
I think too. Absolutely.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful way to put it too. So I have one more question for the mamas.
The mamas.
Are you ready, lovely lady?
Oh, maybe.
Okay. So this conversation is diverse. We have a diverse intergenerational age range, which I love. We have diverse races, and we have diverse geography. Regina being, all those miles away in Atlanta. So tell us about the culture and girls and growing up in both Hawaii and Minnesota. And I said Hawaii, so Mona goes first.
Mona? Your turn, Mona.
You want me? Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Hawaii. I met Howard in Hawaii, who was from the Bronx, New York, in 1968. And I will say that growing up in Hawaii at that time, not only was it a melting pot and still is, but I didn't grow up with any feelings of inferiority because of my race, because we were a majority race. I'm Japanese. That was about 35% of the population at the time. So I didn't grow up with feelings of, a minority. I didn't know I was a minority till I went away to college, actually.
Me either.
More on that later.
Yeah, we'll go back there.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm sure that there was a lot of freedom and independence, you just learned in Hawaii that you carried with you for the rest of your life.
Well, and I also had a father who said, nothing is impossible. And he wasn't a typical Japanese patriarch who favored the son. Whatever, there were two of us, just my brother and myself, but whatever was fair for my brother was also going to be fair for me. And he was very bullish about that. And that was somewhat unusual. So very empowering.
It is. I have to say, my dad is the exact same way.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And he was just very influential in me not ever feeling like there was nothing I could do. The world was my oyster, as he would tell me. And it's just, so great to hear that, your dad was that exact same way. So you don't grow up feeling inferior. You don't grow up thinking, you're a minority. So I think that is very critical as you grow. So you do have the tendency to go for your dreams, because who told you couldn't? No one.
Well, I'll join you in that. I was a daddy's girl too, and mine
Yes.
put a Pinot Noir plant and said, plant it. So yeah, here's to daddy's girls.
Here's our dad.
And your dad's listening.
That's wonderful. Beautifully put. Donna Jean, you want to add Minnesota back there and
Well, what's a nice little German French girl doing in Norwegian Minnesota? Hard to tell. But I had my mother standing behind me and beside me all the time. And should things of that nature come up, Mother would say, we don't believe that. They might, but we don't. And I carry that to this day when I hear, I haven't ever had more fun than being in Ikebana with Mona and all the very, very diverse group that we were. And by golly, we never have encountered any problems. I don't think you did in Ikebana at all. Did you ever,
No,
Mona?
they're strong from the Japanese culture in Japan. There's a strong bias toward Japanese language, which even though I'm Japanese, I couldn't speak. So my upbringing was different. So other than that, I didn't experience any prejudicial, I didn't have any prejudice in my experience in Ikebana.
no?
Well, my mother said always, your education isn't over ever, and you can do anything you want to do. And Carrie, in her first book, showed a picture of she and Paige, the two little girls in the Vineyard Hills, Paige Fouquet, and her caption was, Mama told me I could do anything I wanted to do. So I must have passed it on. But my education isn't even over yet. That's the important thing I will add.
Yes, I think that's fantastic. We're students of life.
We are. So
Right.
yeah, cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
And speaking of students in life and going nationally, do you want to talk to Jessica about that Forbes magazine quote that that how you create wine and memorable meals connects us to other cultures? Uh-oh.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Jessica, can you tell us about the Forbes magazine write-up?
Yeah. This is the one about the rosé, or is this the one about the
It was the
Pinot?
rosé.
Rosé, thank you very much. I mean, so that I was so honored that they included mention of our rosé in that. But I mean, rosé is like a whole component of sort of building commonalities. I mean, talk about a wine that has experienced such a resurgence and an interest, particularly in people who aren't necessarily, wouldn't classify themselves as avid wine drinkers, but rosé is like a whole different category. So I love that wine can be, in that sense, kind of a bridge to start talking about things and start exploring wine.
Yes, absolutely. And I do think it is definitely a bridge. And then, sorry, just a second. I got a kitty here. Hold on. Got a kitty. So let's talk about, okay, kitty doesn't want to go away, so it's just going to join sitting on my feet.
That's fine. You know how we do. Our animals join. They come with on this conversation.
You have a child banging on pans. I have a cat on my feet. So that's how we roll. So let's talk about your national distribution chain. That is quite impressive. You want to talk about the different states that you have distribution in, and what was that like setting it up? What was it like getting your very first distribution client? I mean, you have, I see here, Maryland, Montana, Vermont, Arizona, Illinois. You go, girl.
How can we get these in Georgia? I would love to. The bottle and the label is fantastic.
Right.
I would love to have this sitting on my shelf in my shop.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you so much, Regina. You know, it's happened really slowly. And I would say that how we started to build up national distribution happened almost despite our best efforts at the time. So I want to give some context of how we started the winery, because understanding the context of how we started and why we started frames how we grew it. So back to the conversation with my dad, when I said, listen, if you want to do this, you should go do this. And we both said, well, we're not doing this because we want to grow it big and have other people make the wine. We're doing it out of love of creating the wine. And we're not doing this because we're interested in having bosses all of a sudden or having another owner. So we always wanted to keep things at a manageable scale. So we literally each plunked down $10,000 and said, let's see what we can do with this. We'll start out really small, and then any profit that we make from the revenues will plow back into making wine for the next year. So we started small. You know, our first vintage was just a couple hundred cases, doubled it the next year, doubled it the following year, doubled it the following year. So that is to say, we started slowly. And I remember, you know, I wanted to be slow and grow slowly enough that I thought that we could just manage it all by just our mailing list. And I remember the first distributor that reached out to me was Andre Mack, who at the time,
Andre.
Of course,
OPP, yes.
He had just left Per Se and was with Noble Wines in New York. And he called me and said, listen, I get it. I know you're really small, but I've had your wines. I really like it. And I want to bring them into New York. And it's totally fine if you tell me that you can only give me a small amount. I'm all right with it. So I sat down with him and we talked, and I was so naive. I said, well, I really only want to be in restaurants. I don't want to be in retail. And he said, okay, I hear you, but you need to at least give me like 1 or 2 retail. We need to tell people that they can find it. And so I think I started out by telling him, I'm only going to give you 25 cases a year. And that was it. And then the same thing happened in California. And so we just started really small. I mean, I think right now is a time where the conversation about national distribution is really important in wine because, okay, so just to back up for a second, so there's 2 ways that we can sell our wine. In the prehistoric age of 2019, a small winery like AFI sold 55% direct to consumers. People like any of us that go online, order it, or are part of the club, and it's shipped directly to their home. So that was 55% of our business. The balance, the 45% or so, was sold through, as you're talking about, Carrie, distributors that would then sell in turn to other retailers or restaurants. Because of course we cannot sell business to business directly. We need to sell through a third-party distributor. But that has become very challenging. I think number one, it was already becoming challenging for small wineries because the number of distributors has consolidated so drastically while the number of wineries has increased so dramatically that it already was becoming a bit challenging to stay relevant, the small brand. That has only been compounded by the effects of COVID, because as small distributors are losing one portion of small restaurants, they need to be very, very careful in managing their portfolio. So I think that the opportunity for small wineries like AFI going forward is really about building awareness in the direct to consumer space, because I think that as consumers, it wasn't so long ago that the only way we bought wine was by going to our local grocery store and maybe asking or looking at the shelf. Whereas now, Regina, I mean, you would know the other side of this, but I think that consumers have access to much more information now, and they
do.
Yeah, and so they can be curious if they're interested in Cool Climate Viognier or Oregon Viognier, they can find it themselves. So I really do think that it is incumbent upon us as wineries to make sure that we're accessible directly to consumers, and that we're building a more consumer savvy business model than we've had to in the past.
Right, correct. I would totally agree with that.
I mean, do you find that the questions they're asking you are more educated nowadays, or?
I do, because people, when they come in the shop, they have a vino, and so they're already on their phone trying to see what the ratings are of the wines that are on the shelves. So they've been doing some homework, and now that wine is like become a thing. I mean, it's always been a thing for me, but I think we have consumers who are highly educated. When they come for something in my shop, they already kind of have an idea. I have very few people who come in and say, look, I don't know anything about wine. Can you pick something out for me? I don't know what's red or what's white. That's like a very small percentage of my clientele. Most of my clientele, they have an idea, and they travel. It's all the lifestyles, the wine lifestyle. They travel, they pair wines with their cuisine. So they are, I would say, more educated than the average bear, when they come. Yeah. So
there are people in direct to consumer too that are coming to the tasting rooms now, Jessica, don't you think? People, as are the analogy I was using with Regina's store, is also people that come into the tasting rooms now are more educated in general about, we've all seen that evolution of people having more knowledge.
Exactly.
You come in and say, what's a Pinot Noir?
Right.
Those days are gone. I mean, rarely do you ever get a person and that's fine. Everybody needs to start somewhere, but you rarely get that. Most people's knowledge is much more advanced than it used to be. So Regina, I think you have some Palmer, is it Palmer Creek Vineyard?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Wow.
So pretty.
Beautiful.
And it smells fantastic. This is a real treat for me, I'm gonna just tell you.
Thank you. I have a grandchild bringing down the hallway.
Oh, Mona, thank you so much. It was our pleasure. Oh
So
my,
nice to meet you.
Great to see you, and thank you so much.
take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
So this is fantastic. I have to know more about this. Okay, so some barrels, contact. Can you talk to me
Yep.
about the?
Yep, absolutely. So this is, this Pinot is, so we have, so to back up, I do about 2,500 to 3,000 cases a year. I have a small estate vineyard that is the one that my mom was talking about that my dad planted in 1987. And, but aside from that, I manage blocks at 6 other sites. When I say I manage blocks, what I mean by that is that I may have a long-term, the vineyard is owned by somebody else, but I may have a long-term lease, could be a 10-year lease, could be an evergreen lease on a specific set of rows, and I control all viticultural decisions in that set of rows.
Oh, nice.
So in some cases, I directly employ a vineyard manager and work directly with the vineyard manager. In some other cases, the owner may employ the vineyard manager, but I still give viticultural direction. So I have essentially 3 levels of Pinot Noir blends that I make, and then a variety of different single vineyards. In any given year, it's 3 or 4 single vineyards. This is a single vineyard from Palmer Creek Vineyard, which is located in the Eola Amity Hills. It is very near and dear to my heart because it is one of the first vineyards we started with. So when we started in 2003, we started with Palmer Creek Vineyard and Seven Springs Vineyard, both in the Eola Amity Hills. And so I feel like I have watched this vineyard grow up. And one of the things that stands out to me and that characterize this site is that it is just meticulously tended by, it's owned by Larry and Janet Richards. Janet Richards farms it herself and lives on property. And she's just extraordinarily attentive to detail. So, you know, as an example, we have a crush crew that used to help us, especially when we were much smaller. And they helped us for many years. And they would help sort the grapes on the days that they came in. And they would say, I'm getting really bored. There's nothing to sort out. Is this Palmer Creek? Because they just got used to Palmer Creek being really pristine, clean fruit.
That's cute. Wow. And a great AVA too.
Yeah, this is lovely. This is absolutely lovely.
Thank you. So this is a combination of 2 clones, Pomard and 777 clone. You asked about, so with Palmer Creek, this is about 25 to 30% new oak. I think about 25% new oak. And I work with 3 French coopers in 5 forests. And yeah, and this one spent about 11 months. We didn't winter this one over.
This is beautiful.
Wow. And just the color alone.
I mean, it's just fantastic. It's just so pretty.
I see, Jessica, when I was reading about the different varietals that you produce, that one of your producers is actually the neighbors where I grew up, the neighboring vineyard, the Marsh Vineyard.
Yes.
We had our neighboring vineyards there in the Dundee Hills back in the day. So you want to chat a little about that connection?
Yeah, totally. So I am so grateful to work with Marsh Vineyard, because to work with a vineyard of that legacy is just tremendous. And here's how we started working with it. So when we started in 2003, my dad had been a hobby winemaker. So he was calling vineyards that he just loved, and he knew which ones he enjoyed wine from there. And he started calling Jim Marsh, the grandfather, Jim Marsh, like every week. And he would just keep calling him and calling him and calling him. And I think finally Jim said, if I give you some grapes, will you stop calling me all the time? So we have had the same block there for quite some time, and they just are extremely, so that's a different arrangement. I lease the land from them, and then I work directly with a vineyard manager.
From
And
Jim
one
and
of the
Martha.
things- pardon?
You have any interaction with Jimmy?
Not so much, more with Martha.
Martha
More
and
with
Jim.
Martha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could
Martha,
I say something about Jim Marsh?
yeah.
He was one of the 12, and the first 3 rows that you come to on Warden Hill Road are the first 3 rows that were planted in the Red Hills of
History.
and it predates 1965. Our grapes were planted. We bought the land in 69 and planted it in 1972. Jim Marsh and Dickie Rath then joined hands and sold cuttings to the rest of us. So you were talking to one of the pioneer beginners.
Right. And I think Jessica, that's such a great synergy for her to have with Jim, because as you and I know, Jim's got a lot of knowledge to share, and he's a wonderful human being.
Yep.
He likes to talk.
Yep.
And he's 94.
Yep.
Is he? Oh,
And one of the things that was really touching to me and that endeared me to this sense of place, I mean, it's kind of like people always say, which one's your favorite? Well, you don't have a favorite, because it's like choosing your favorite child,
yeah.
which is, you absolutely may have a favorite, but it may be different the next day because you like them for different reasons, and you see their potential in different ways. But one of the moments that I knew that Marsh Vineyard was so extraordinarily special to us was that after my dad died very suddenly, I was calling all of our vineyard owners just to say, yes, I'm still here and I still want to work with this, and do you have any issues or concerns? And I called Jim, and he said, there's no issue. This will always be yours as long as you want to work with it. And that year at harvest, I happened to go up during harvest for my pick. And I walked through when you walk up to a harvest pick, there's a frenetic level of energy, and you hear all the buzz and people moving back and forth and picking and plop, 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 and buckets and people running. And I kind of came up through the vineyard, and I looked and I saw that all of the bins were labeled Block Howard for my dad. My dad's name is Howard. And it just was one of those things that I was like, I have a responsibility to be a steward to this block, and to I have to honor the legacy that came before it. So
Good for you, Jessica.
That is a fantastic, phenomenal story. Yes.
It's the strong girls.
Yes.
Right.
Here's the strong girls. Yes. Cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
That is so fantastic. I really want this here in Georgia, but we'll keep moving.
All right, I'm going to follow up with you, Regina, and see if we can find somebody that'll.
Yeah, I think I may have somebody that can appreciate this and the story behind it, more importantly, because you don't want to go into somebody who just is like, okay, we're just going to bring another wine in.
Right.
I work with a female distributor who has a phenomenal story herself. And maybe the introduction needs to happen, because I think that your story, I think she could totally appreciate these wines and the story.
Fantastic.
So anyway, so we'll have to chat. So, Jessica, I have a question. So what is your greatest achievement to date, that you feel is your greatest achievement in your career? And that is saying bringing light, diversity, and inclusivity to this place that we, reside, that is, usually male dominated. What do you think?
So answering that is a couple of different levels. The first is greatest achievement. I think that my greatest achievement for me has been that, it's not about the numbers. It's not about number of cases produced. It's not about scores. It's not about number of new markets. It's not about dollar sales. It's really about individual connection points. And when you feel that your story has resonated with one other person, it's stories that I hear like that that tell me this wine is fostering those connections. So I'll give you an example. I got an email yesterday from a woman that said, I forgot how she found our wines, and or how she heard of it. And she went online and she read the story and she said, I was so touched because my father just passed away and we used to work together. And I'm wondering, what do I do now? And do I have the strength to go on? And then I read your story and I really feel inspired that I can move forward in a way that honors what my dad and I built together. So it's individual stories like that that make me feel like all of those late nights at the winery cleaning up fermenters and all of the time that you're ordering toilet paper for the tasting room and running all over the place and all of that, that it feels like that is why we do what we do, is to create something that brings people together. And because our story is about family, I want it to be shared with whomever you define as family. And so that's what touches me the most. The other part of your question was about, the other part of your question was about, as it relates
like diversity and inclusiveness.
Yeah. So the first thing is, well, why is diversity and inclusiveness important in wine specifically? I think that diversity and equity is important in any industry whatsoever, where we feel there's an opportunity to ask ourselves, how did we get here? Who had access to getting here? And what does that mean for the future? And in wine, that's relevant because we have issues of land ownership, of who had access to buying land and how did it come about? And we have issues of who is our labor pool and and that relates to immigration.
It's been that way forever, right, Donna Jean? The labor pool has always been an issue, for sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
from the very, very first.
Has it?
Absolutely. That was always the harvest, particularly.
Yeah.
I mean, when Carrie's grandparents came out to help, and Jim and I helped, and
we had the mom
in the early years.
Yeah, and a huge diverse population of pickers in those early years. But anyway, just we're diverting, but we're agreeing with what you're saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think that when we work in an industry where land ownership has been an issue, which the labor force has been an issue, where credentialing, whether it's WSET or the court or whatever it is, where credentialing has been an issue, we have to ask ourselves, who had access to enter this? And what does that mean for who I see around me? And what does that say for the potential? And I believe that it is in our best interest to have an industry that reflects the diversity and the vibrance of our potential customer base and our potential employee base. And that requires some degree of sensitivity. So what does that have to do with me is that I think that you only build change maybe one small chip at a time. Am I going to change the whole world of wine? No. But there are certain small things that I can do to make commitments of how I run my business and just talking about that so that others may start to think about the assumptions they've made in how they run their business, which is why I'm so grateful that you're having this conversation and that you have facilitated topics like this. I think that we have a very important responsibility to think about this and to think about how we can encourage ourselves and others to be a bit more open in how we do business that creates better access.
By being role models.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, That's what you do. And I think that's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy to sometimes get overwhelmed and say, I can't possibly make a difference. I can't change the whole thing. But you can only change your little world. And if you think very
Yeah.
carefully
Mhm.
about the assumptions that you've made, so here's an example. I think it wasn't, and this wasn't like a necessarily conscious decision for better or worse, but I remember like a year and a half ago, I looked at my list of two things: my major vendors and my list of, like major suppliers, and then my list of major customers, meaning mostly distributor customers. And I thought, well, does the ownership structure of those companies or management structure reflect what I believe the wine world should be? And if not, then at least I should think about that.
Yeah.
Mhm. But that is so insightful on your part, that you have that consciousness, to be able to even ask that question, to even go do a gut check to say, hey, do these people, or these people that I work with, align with, kind of what I believe? And since this winery, your wines are so personal, I could totally see how you would do that. But not everybody takes that second, look at, what are we really doing here? So kudos to you for that.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing, it's been, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of used to navigating a world where, I'm biracial. My mom's Japanese, obviously. My dad was Jewish. And I'm used to navigating a world where my background's a little bit different than other people look like around me. And so I just want to, now that I'm in a position, and I recognize that I'm in a privileged position of, I'm as an owner, I can make decisions for my company. If I were not in that position, I may not necessarily feel that empowered, but we all create our own culture. Whether we're the owners, decision makers, managers, or not, we all create our own culture very actively.
Right. And we all have a piece in we all are a player, even though you feel, you were talking about, you want to just change everything. Even what you're doing, Jessica, is making a really big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's why Regina and I started this, just to your point.
Yeah.
So we could start this conversation, because she and I developed this unique friendship where she and I, didn't know each other at all. We met in Lodi at a wine bloggers conference 4 years ago.
Yep.
And just really had this monumental, it's like meeting your friend at camp. You just really have a strong bond. And when all the racial tension and protests and all of the sad things on top of COVID started happening, I reached out to Regina because I felt like our friendship could be an example to start this dialogue. Conversations that Regina and I, right? I mean, I'm not.
We have them all the time. We have these conversations, and they're true and hard conversations, but we're able to actually have the conversation. And I think it starts at least there by being able to at least have the conversation. You know what I mean? And not act like, oh, this is really not happening. I don't know if I can have this conversation but you got to have the conversation, really, in my opinion.
And also, I think that you two set an example that it's one relationship at a time that you start to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I always think of it as it's one decision at a time, because I can have an aspiration. I can tell you what my aspiration is to incorporate diversity, equity, belongingness, and inclusion into AFI wines. But it's a series of small decisions. It's a series of, I mean, I can't think of it.
No, you're right. It is a series of small steps. It's one.
Yeah, exactly. And these are the small steps.
Right? Oprah, what's Oprah say? Next step. Just do the
next step.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just do the next step. Yeah. Well, yeah. And with that. And you know what else? We also bring some levity to it too. I mean, we talk about white guilt, and Regina and I
Yeah.
talk about those things in a way that it's all right to kind of laugh and say, that's kind of a crazy thing.
Yeah, 'cause I didn't know that
We see that.
existed.
Right. Regina's taught me a lot. And, I hope that I've taught her something too. But I'm so honored to share the experiences, just like you said, Jessica. Every conversation builds on itself with me and Regina. And I just, and now I'm so honored to have you be a part of the conversation and contributing too, because together we're more powerful. And the more we support each other, as we all know, and we got wonderful support from these mamas. And I know Regina had wonderful support from her mama. I've heard wonderful things about her mama. And so it's just, this is such a valuable conversation. And I
It is, and I am so
we have another
excited.
wine to drink too, though. We have
Yes, I do. I got my
we're so
second.
busy talking that, right?
I know. This is like so this is the last one that I have, and it smells fantastic again. Is it called Kalita?
Yeah, Kalita Vineyard, which is named after the owners, Arthur and Sherry Kalita, who planted the vineyard
These are fantastic.
20 years ago. And we started with the vineyard in 2004. We were the second winemakers to work with the fruit. And it is, first of all, a physically beautiful vineyard that is located in the Yamhill Carlton AVA. And it's nestled into a bowl, like an amphitheater-like bowl, south, southeast, southwest, and varies elevation between 400 and 800 feet. So quite a lot of variety. We have the top part of the vineyard, so roughly from about 675 to 800 feet in elevation, south facing. And it has just been a treat to watch this vineyard mature as well. And I have to comment that, the relationship that a winemaker and vineyard owner have is really important. And I honestly believe that it affects the wine. I mean, I really...
It's like talking to plants. It's like talking to your plants, right?
Talking to your plant. I love it.
Yes. And the relationship that you have, with the vineyard, but also with the vineyard owners, that human connection, because that is the big connection point for me, is it's always about the people. Wine is a people business for me. And
totally.
I believe that those relationships can really affect how the wine turns out.
You give it some love, yes.
And
well, I can say something because it's been a joy.
You can always say something
to this generation. I love everyone.
I love you too.
Keep on keeping on. Don't give it up.
Well, and I have to talk for our last question. I have to address that keeping on, because I think we need to raise a glass to all of us who are participating, and Donna, Jean, my mother included, because coping with the pandemic, which was the last thing that I was going to say to Jessica, here we are coping with the pandemic in a really positive way, because as we all know, it's hard, y'all. It's not fun.
Yeah.
And the more that we can talk to each other, the better. And I think that goes for my mom and me and everybody. It's about connection. What do you think, Jessica?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's, I would be remiss in not commenting on how how COVID has affected us as a business.
Really, honestly.
Yeah, and I believe, so first of all, I'll say it's basically affected us. We talked earlier that there's the direct to consumer portion of the business, and then there's the business to business portion, which is through distributors. That portion of business for me, for AV, is frozen solid. I mean, well, I shouldn't say frozen solid. I have developed one new distributor in this time frame, but generally speaking, the distribution portion of the segment is seeing their independent restaurants not ordering, or if they are ordering, they're ordering very small quantities and really reordering what they have. And so that has made that a very constricted portion of the market. I have to just say that I feel extraordinarily grateful that we are a winery that has inventory to sell. I mean, if we were a restaurant that had been shut down, that would be, my heart goes out to restaurants.
Oh,
But I
yes.
think that it is just affecting our entire supply chain, because just as it affects vineyard owner, it affects me, it affects distributors, it affects Regina, it affects restaurants. So I first of all want to acknowledge the impact that it has up and down the supply chain, and also say that, sometimes some of my club members and friends ask, what can I do to help? And I always say, buy the wine you want to drink. Don't be lazy. Don't just, go to your whatever grocery store and buy what's shelf stacked at Costco or what have you.
Yeah, exactly.
But don't be lazy. Think about who you want to support. You have this opportunity. You can support small business owners like Regina. You can support small business owners like me. But in order to do that confidently, you ought to know about our values, and you ought to know what we stand for and what our story is. And I think that there's an example that can be said for that, because we've seen this happen already in retail fashion. It's not so much about going to malls anymore. It's really about finding DTC businesses that you support a very specific product and experience. And maybe it's Allbirds, maybe it's Warby Parker, but whatever it is, there's something specific that you resonate with that brand. And that gives us as consumers an opportunity to be very thoughtful about who we're supporting. But beyond that, I think that wine, we'll go back to where we started, which is wine is a connection point. And wine, we do not have the ability to travel where we want to right now. And we do not have the ability to go out to restaurants for the four of us to be meeting live and going out to breaking bread together. We don't have that opportunity, but what we do have is the ability to gather, even if it's electronically, to gather and share wine and share our impressions. And there's something magical in that.
There is something magical in that. Cheers to that.
Yes, cheers to that. Remember the Italian singing in Italy at the first part of quarantine? Where they recorded the people in a town in Italy where they opened their windows and they started singing,
Yes.
that way back in like you said, the prehistoric ages when this whole thing started in March.
Well, March, April.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in conclusion, Jessica and my mother, Donna Jean, and my sister, Regina, this has been absolutely delightful.
Oh, it's been everything. And Jessica, I think you're awesome. And Donna Jean, I love you. So, you are so awesome.
I couldn't do without any of you. That's what makes our age wonderful, is having you.
Oh, well.
And you.
Love you more.
Thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. And, Carrie, I love that you wanted to make it intergenerational as well, because just as sometimes I know we probably as women in business think that we have a responsibility to the next generation to be an example, to inspire, so too do we take our inspiration from our mother's generation. And so
absolutely.
Thank you, Donna Jean, for sharing your experience.
I'm happy to. And I'm actually thrilled to be a part of the three of you chatting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I learned so much from it. It's amazing how much you can take in from other people's stories. And it doesn't really matter, because to me, it was just 4-5 energies together, sharing our stories.
Well, Mona and I will be flower friends forever, and give your mom a hug for me.
I will.
All right. That's everybody. We're signing off for episode.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mozeico for being our guest, and everybody else. Signing off.
Cheers.
Atlanta. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.